if you bring someone into the practice, you sit them down, maybe you have an online training webinar for your software. That is all very helpful. But so much of that training is going to come from the people who are training them. And it's that those peer-to-peer moments that really don't just shape their knowledge of the system, even though that's part of it. It's the culture about how you treat technology systems.
Dentistry really is about relationships. People, they want to come to a place where they feel welcome, where they feel cared for, and where they feel like people like them. All right, welcome back to the Apex Perspective. I'm Matt Hale. I'm joined today by David Lohmann and David Hanson, our Chief Technology Officer. We're excited to talk a little bit about technology and integrating technologies into dental practices. David, this is such a massive area. I think particularly since the AI wave has kind of started to crest and wash over the dental industry. There's a lot out there, a lot happening, a whole lot of noise talking about it. Would love to share a little bit with our listeners about kind of how we think about internally technologies and integrating them into the dental practice, where we spend our time and energy, where we choose to try things out, and where we choose to wait. So why don't you start just by sharing a little bit about how we think about innovation and bringing those technologies that are really going to make a difference into the organization.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot to choose from out there, and there's a lot of companies offering a lot of different solutions for all kinds of different problems that you can imagine. So, it's easy to get wrapped up into what's kind of cool and exciting and new, and what's really being pushed by a lot of people. Sometimes maybe even a little peer pressure if you see things in other clinics that that you're hearing are really neat and really exciting, and you want to be part of that wave. But paradoxically, a lot of times, some of the very best ones we can find are ones that are simple or that present simply to the office, right? So people who are working in your front office or in a clinical setting typically have issues they want to solve, and complicated things make for an interesting technology demo. But what's actually going to make the day work in your office is things that kind of blend into the background, right? And they're very effective at doing something that is a distinct problem you have, but that are also going to not require super dramatic changes in the way people actually want to operate the clinic. So it helps you do something a lot better. It helps your practice be a lot more efficient. And you have to really keep your eye on the ball for what is it we're trying to solve? Is this going to fix something that we need to fix? Is it fixing a broken process, or is it just something that's kind of neat that we're throwing into a process that actually already works, and then maybe it's not worth it? So I think it's important to make a distinction when you're approaching these decisions as, not innovation or change for change's sake, but doing it because it really is something that's going to make the practice operate better.
David, when I meet with doctors, a lot of times on the technology front, they fall into two buckets, and they're certainly not equally weighted buckets, but we have certainly the bucket I fall into, which is I'm a pretty late adopter. I want to make sure that I fully understand it. Once I'm committed to it, I'm going to be committed to it, but I'm pretty slow to get there technologically. We also come across doctors who are super early adopters of kind of everything, right? They're the first with a 3D printer in their office. They're the first with the newest SaaS software that promises to solve some issue. In your mind, how would you encourage people to think about technology adoption, when to do it, when not to do it, how to prepare their team for it to ensure ultimately kind of the highest level of adoption and ultimately success?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, you can see that dynamic certainly between doctors, but you also get that same exact dynamic between office managers or even front desk staff, right? That's just something, that may even extend itself, or almost certainly extends itself way outside the clinic, right? The guy who wants the 3D printer in his office is probably also the one with the newest Apple Watch and, all the other technology that goes with it, because that's part of people's personality, inside or outside the clinical setting. One thing I think that can be really good for that is, after you've kind of applied the rubric of, is this going to be something that's actually going to help the practice? Is it a practical solution to a real problem and not just a shiny technology? Then really engage those people. And they can really help, especially in a multi-clinical setting. They can help be kind of the people out front who are going to prove the technology and see, does it live up to the hype? Does it actually make the change? And then they can be powerful voices inside the organization for helping adoption with those doctors or other staff that are just a little bit more cautious. And a lot of times, when we're operating, in a larger setting where we have technology that we want to bring into multiple offices, it helps a lot when that's coming from their peer offices, right? Or from other people in their office who say, hey, this isn't just something that we heard about that now everyone has to use, but hey, we've been trying this for a month and, we really saw a benefit. And that kind of peer-to-peer discussion, I think, takes it out of that realm of the hesitancy of a lot of doctors who might take a more cautious approach and say, I'm not sure this is really for me. I don't want to take the risk. I'm not excited by this new technology, so I really only want to adopt it if there's a clear reason behind it. And if they see that coming from their peers, from other doctors, from other office leadership, they're far more likely to honestly believe you and then to translate that into meaningful change inside their own clinic.
Yeah, I feel like there's with the two personality types, right? You kind of have to know yourself and know how likely you are to actually adopt a technology. I think what you see sometimes is you have somebody who's naturally a late adopter personality, who either feels the peer pressure, they go to a conference or whatever, or they get sold by somebody and they end up spending money like they're an early adopter, and then the technology just sits there, right? Which is the worst outcome, right, of all of them, because then you've bear the burden of the cost and you get none of the benefit. Whereas, if you're an early adopter and you want to spend money on new technology to try it because you enjoy that, you get some benefit from that experience, even if it doesn't work out, right? That's part of that early adopter personality. So I think knowing yourself is important, and being honest with yourself about, am I doing this because I think there's a real problem that I can actually solve, and it's going to make my life better, going to make my team's life better, going to make for a better patient experience? Or am I doing this because I feel like I'm going to be behind if I don't do what, the crowd is doing, what the cool kids are doing, so to speak?
I guess if we separate this technology conversation into two buckets, you've got some of the clinical, and the majority of that's going to up to now. There's some clinical AI that's come out and is fantastic over the last couple of years. But historically, the bulk of that clinical technology has been more hardware in nature, right? In-office milling, scanners, 3D printers, some of that technology over the last decade or two. That may come more natural for a doctor to evaluate, hey, what impact does this have on me day to day, and how am I going to implement this into the workflow? On the let's talk about the software, the SaaS side of technology here. You guys spend a lot of time internally, both evaluating what's out there, and then trying to make kind of educated decisions on what is the best platform to back for us at Apex and roll out internally. How would you encourage others to approach that process? Can be overwhelming, especially if it's not something that's kind of a natural language that you speak in technology form. But what approach would you encourage others to take, or how have you guys approached so many different technology options that have certainly come to market?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the important things that's easy to lose sight of when you're kind of entering that software world is, there's a lot of vendors out there that have, frankly, fantastic products. It can be hard to pick between them sometimes. And what's easy to lose sight of is that, okay, when you're watching a vendor demo, for example, and they're going to show you, hey, we have this use case for, processing insurance claims or doing patient communication or whatever it is. It's really easy for those systems to be really impressive and honestly to work really well in an isolated context like that. But your dental practice is a large, complicated machine, right? And a lot of times what gets lost in that is that the interaction between the parts in that machine are really important. So, how does that tool interact with your practice management system? How does it interact with maybe the other tools that your front desk might be using or your office leadership that are not suited to that specific use case, right? So there's the merits of each individual product that you evaluate kind of on their own. And then there's kind of the synergistic effect that really needs to happen for all of them to communicate well and to not wind up in a situation where, you can get a lot of fatigue from saying, okay, well, this piece of software is doing this, so we'll use that. But then, oh, I need to switch to this login on this other piece of software for this other part of the operation. And that movement, that friction that can happen in there is something that's really easy to kind of lose track of. So I think that's important to realize, where does this fit in the bigger picture? And, certainly there's a place where maybe you pick the right tool for the job and that's worth it. But you also need to think about, like, what does that look like for the day where you're going to be moving between these systems at a high rate of speed? And can they really provide a natural, enjoyable work experience when you're doing that? So that's certainly a big part of it that I think is easy to overlook when you just kind of are wowed by the technology that's available in any individual part of that system.
I think when I step back, technology, as I formulated this question in my head, I kept adding buckets. But when we think of technology adoption, a lot of times it'll fall into 4 different buckets that we're chasing, right? It's either a better clinical outcome, and can we get that with this piece of technology? A better patient experience. So is it almost more of a marketing tool? Can it help make that in-office experience or outside of office experience when it comes to scheduling and things like that more enjoyable? Can it make your team more efficient with the existing headcount you have? And ultimately, and maybe this is what oftentimes catches headlines in terms of broader technology adoption out there with AI and stuff, it's this reduction in headcount. I think we focus the overwhelming majority of our time on technology that achieves the first 3 buckets, but just be interested in kind of hearing each of your thoughts on, as we're evaluating what technologies to prioritize, evaluate, adopt, ultimately roll out, where do you see the most bang for your buck in kind of what's out there today and ultimately what we're pursuing as an organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that you can think about it in those different discrete categories, and there's probably a lot of sub-variation in those. I do think that, one of the ways that's important to think about that too is that, you talk about, okay, well, the patient experience and that being almost a marketing activity or something like that. It kind of is, but it's also when you smooth out those processes, you kind of create some space when you can take friction out of a process and you can create space where the time that you are interacting with the staff is really about a more human connection and about feeling confident in that staff. I think that's one of the big things that the good kind of automation can really get you. Certainly there's plenty of opportunity to streamline, and a lot of people hear that, oh, we're going to streamline this, we're going to make this more efficient, and they view that's coded language, right, for we're going to fire people or we're going to have fewer people. That's maybe one way to look at it, but I think a better way to look at that is to say, well, how are we going to take you from doing something when you're at the office that is not your highest and best use as an employee, right? So if you're working front desk and you're sitting there all day calling insurance to do insurance eligibility verification, and when a patient comes in the door and is here for an appointment and you're going to talk to them, but you're rushed, you're maybe in a bad mood because you've been on the phone with the insurance company all morning, is that really taking you to your highest level of how you can interact and how you can represent your practice? And the answer is probably no. It's probably not why you got into working in dentistry, is to do insurance verification calls or something, right? So if you can create that space by taking away the very redundant, very rote, monotonous work and automate some of that, you can create space for a better experience for everybody, the employee and the patient.
Yeah. The busy work, right? At the end of the day, nobody wants to do the busy work. And if you take that away, then exactly, you've got that opportunity for people to connect with people, right? At the end of the day, dentistry really is about relationships. It's a relationship business. People, they want to come to a place where they feel welcome, where they feel cared for, and where they feel like people actually, like them and they like the people. And so, as David said, I think when you take away some of the things that are distracting really from that core aspect, you create the opportunity for more investment in those relationships, which ultimately strengthens your practice.
I know one of the things that's, I've shared this story internally, but where those buckets overlap a lot is, you're after one outcome, and if done right, crosses these buckets. So my mother retired, moved to Dallas a few years ago, went into my wife's practice for the first time, got a CBCT scan, got a wellness scan on the digital scanner, and walked out of the office, called her longtime partner, and was like, "You need to find a new dentist. You won't believe this technology." And she calls me, shares this story. I'm like, "Mom, this isn't that new." But there is a massive gap in technology adoption in this industry. Some of it has been for decades. I think dentistry and the investment in technology in dentistry has been, we've said, 10 to 15 years behind the physician side of medicine. That gap has closed a lot, is my view, in the last 5 years. There's really cool AI technology on the clinical side. We're seeing more and more of it on the administrative side. It's allowing us to be more efficient while at the same time meeting our patients, our ultimate customer, where they want to be met. Be interested in hearing kind of you guys talk about what do you see out there that's most exciting? Maybe not the product that is there yet, but opportunity, and maybe even where you've seen people really trying to put resources behind it. Again, whether or not it's there yet, but what's most exciting to you when you look out there on the dental technology front?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think to me, from where I sit in my seat, the opportunity to streamline the front office is massive because there's still so much that's inefficient. It's not just insurance. Everything about interacting with patients outside the office in this industry is typically not great, right? There are some solutions that are point solutions that are very good. But as we move towards a more and more integrated world, where you can have, your lunch delivered to your desk in 2 minutes, of clicking a couple buttons on your phone, the expectation is it's going to be easy to interact with businesses. I expect to be able to text with a business. I expect to be able to book an appointment online. And I expect that when I do that they're going to have all the context on the other side to be able to treat me like me and not like a number. And so I think finding ways to bring all those different technologies that enable that experience outside the office to be seamless, to be smooth, and to not increase the amount of work that it takes in the office in order to deliver that is a huge opportunity. So for me, it's really the front office aspect of it.
Yeah, I think you're right on there. I think that the ability to kind of have that interaction through whatever modality you prefer. A lot of people, that's going to be through the cell phone now, or through the website on the cell phone and that kind of thing. That really is just a kind of new frontier, I think, for a lot of not necessarily even dentistry, just a lot of kind of medical and medical adjacent businesses are kind of used to a very old way of doing things, which is, calling people on the phone, sending the appointment reminders in the mail, even, that kind of thing. I still get, things with my kids that we get, doctor's notices, postcard in the mail, right? And, to book 8 months ahead for your next pediatrician appointment, right? So I think, bringing that to where people really are is going to be it's not just exciting because it's important, but I think that as generations kind of change over, right, that is just going to absolutely be the expectation. And practices that can't find some way to kind of integrate and meet people where they are really going to struggle. Because as we get younger people growing up who are more technology natives and that kind of thing, they're just gonna, like you said, Matt, they're gonna absolutely expect that. And if you're not able to provide that, it's kind of double-edged. It's not just that's exciting because it's fun. That's just where the world is moving. There's definitely still a lot of improvement to happen in that, a lot of streamlining, but I think we'll see that happen and in the medical space in general, not even just dentistry.
We, I think, have historically prioritized our initiatives and adoption based on highest opportunity out there. What either problem to solve or opportunity to go achieve or attack. As a larger organization, we have more of that data across practices. We get more feedback from our teams of what are your biggest struggles. We see repeatedly what are the items that are sucking up the most time in the practice that we believe we can go attack with some sort of efficiency technology. If you're an individual practice owner, I'd just be interested in, again, it goes back to technology evaluation is a big time commitment. And it can be overwhelming if we try to throw a whole bunch of solutions at different problems all at the same time. How would you think about encouraging a practice owner to, I guess, utilize feedback from his or her team to help identify what is truly the biggest issue for them? Maybe not necessarily the doctor, but the biggest issue that their team are consistently encountering to help maybe focus and prioritize that technology search.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key there is, obviously you have to know your staff and their pain and how they're actually operating their day. I do think one thing that is really important that we certainly think about, we take this approach, is trying to have a metric-driven approach. It can happen a lot of times that when you talk to people about what is taking the most time or what is their biggest frustration, there's an emotional response to that that's also is very valid, but can also be not necessarily the analytical response that you're looking for. So I think when you're looking at tools, depending on your approach and kind of the severity of the situation, I guess, think about, hey, how can we measure what's happening right now? How can we measure, if we have a process in the office that we think is either frustrating or it's not efficient or not streamlined, okay, how do we get a baseline for something we can actually measure about that process so that if we do go find a new technology or we're going to try on a new process, do we have an objective way of saying whether that improved or didn't improve? And you can sit down with your office and say, hey, do you feel better about this? Does that work? And that's certainly, there is a valid part. You want your employees to be happy and you want them to feel like they're not frustrated during their day. But, you also need to add that kind of, that layer of having something we're measuring and then determining, are we getting a return on this new tool that we've tried? Or is it just something that, yeah, it feels a little smoother or, it's different. So someone likes, because the process is different, but it didn't actually get any better.
Yeah. You bring up an interesting point, David, that is, how do you evaluate these tools after you implement them? So many of these are SaaS solutions where they get implemented and then the person that sold it to you moves on and you've got it. And with a SaaS solution, unlike, the old world, right, where you used to buy something and that was it, SaaS solution, you keep paying for it and you probably keep paying more for it, right, every year or every 6 months in a lot of cases. So how do you think about, holding those vendors to account, tracking performance and knowing, did something actually deliver for you?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's important to look at that too. And when you're evaluating a tool, you're talking to a vendor, especially, right? They give you the shiny, presentation about how great this is going to be. Just make sure to ask them, say like, okay, well, if you're going to tell me in this sales pitch that I'm going to make my investment back, immediately or in 6 months or whatever, like, we'll make a plan to show me that, make a plan to, how are we going to follow up? Are we going to get back on this call? And like you said, part of the problem is a lot of times that sales guy that sold you the product in 6 months, you find out he's not there anymore. But hopefully you can have that relationship with that company to say, hey, look, I need a path forward that we're not just going to, look at this and say, sure, that sounds cool. And I can see why that would have a return on investment. That's not really enough. You need to say, okay, what are we going to gather now? What are we going to gather later? How are we going to come back together when it's time? You said a lot of these products, they give you a rate for 6 months or a year, and then they want to come back and raise the rate, on you year after year. Say, okay, well, each of those times we're going to have that discussion. We're going to look at these metrics and we're going to see if this still makes sense or not. And if you can't come into it with that mindset, you're just going to be stuck saying like, well, we're going to evaluate based on how difficult is it to transition off your software. Right. And that's really where those companies get you, is they want you to be thinking about it that, okay, I'm in their system. It's too much work to get out of the system. So I'm just going to pay whatever they want me to pay into perpetuity. Right. Yeah. I'm locked in. That's their dream. Right. And so, you need to kind of flip the script and say, okay, well, no, how are we evaluating that? Is this still earning us an ROI, versus our baseline? Or versus, at some point you're going to have to say, versus a competitor. What does that look like? Does it look like changing? Now, you probably didn't get into dentistry because you want to be evaluating software vendors nonstop and pitting them against each other, right? But, as the, put on the kind of, if you're, private practice, the business owner hat, that is part of what you need to be doing, is thinking strategically about those things. And how can you measure those? Just as certainly as you have a patient coming in and you're going to have, objective measures of their oral health and then want to compare that, every 6 months or every year. You have to think about your business as like a type of patient, and you need analytical measures to be able to evaluate over time. And those measures a lot of times are a lot more complex than just production or something like that, right? So think about it that way, so you can make a good treatment plan for your business.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Internally, we talk a lot about taking time to work on the practice and not in the practice. I think that's another great way to frame that, of, thinking of the practice as a patient. What is the treatment? What is the diagnosis? And what is the treatment plan for your practice? I love that.
Well, I think one of the things that we see continually in practices that we evaluate to come into the organization, and it's been this way back from, again, in-office milling. Now it's shifted into these SaaS products where the upfront investment has come down dramatically, right? Especially on SaaS versus, a big piece of hardware. But I still think the perceived switching cost for a lot of doctors keeps people utilizing a technology or underutilizing a technology and paying more and more and more for it year over year. So I think when I guess for the sake of this conversation, let's assume you picked a good product. So you've implemented a product. It really doesn't matter what the ROI on the spreadsheet says if there's not adoption. And I'd just be interested to hear each of you talk about what have you seen is the biggest key to a successful adoption, whether that's upfront training, ongoing training, consistency, really anything that's going to take a tool that you're convinced is a good product, but make it actually successful in your practice.
Yeah, go ahead, David. I was going to just throw out that, I think it's all about culture. And so really it's a bit broader, I think, than that specific tool. But, David, let's hear your take first.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think for really, especially, and this matters more in larger practices or larger organizations, is having that kind of peer-to-peer culture around, hey, we're doing this together, and there's benefit to this, and we're gonna move forward with it, is really important. You can do, certainly there is training is really important, right? That's kind of a prerequisite. So let's just say that's the table stakes, is you got to be able to train your people to use it. But on the flip side of that, a lot of that training that maybe you think is the training they're going to get isn't the training they're going to get, right? I am, if you bring someone into the practice, you sit them down, you have a training material, maybe you have an online training webinar for your software, that kind of stuff. That is all very helpful. But so much of that training is going to come from the people who are training them, the people that are sitting next to them at the front office or anywhere in the practice, right? And it's those peer-to-peer moments that really don't just shape their knowledge of the system, even though that's part of it. It's the culture about how you treat the technology systems, right? So, you want to be in a position where your staff, when a new employee comes on, right, is saying, okay, we're gonna learn this thing. If you have questions about it, we're gonna help you, but we're excited because this works really well, and we want to show you how well it works, and we want to show you how this is gonna be better than maybe what you worked at a different practice before. We want to be excited about showing you why we're better, why our product is better, why our technology solutions are better. You can contrast that with the kind of grumpiness that can happen if people don't have that, right? That, oh, well, they got this software, but we're not, I don't know, and they just said we have to use it, but it doesn't really work well here, so we're going to kind of not use that part, and that kind of thing. And that can be a shortcoming in the software for sure, but I think there is also just such an important part of, we had talked a little bit about finding the people who are our technology leaders, who are kind of ahead of the curve of high adoption, right? And getting them engaged, getting them excited, and making sure that attitude of excitement, and maybe I'm an engineering guy, right? So getting excited about software is something that I do very easily. For a lot of people, that wouldn't even register in their brain. But having that positive attitude about, hey, we're all here, we all see why this technology helps our job, and if we see the benefit in it, then we're all going to have a positive attitude and we're all going to help each other make it work because we know that it's worth our time versus being a chore of something to learn. If you have software that's just a chore for people to have to learn to use, you're going to get moderate acceptance at best, right?
Well, I think it's coming at an interesting time in dentistry too, right? We've seen this pronounced generational shift among the workforce, certainly in our industry, but the broader workforce. It's a generation coming into the workforce that has spent their entire life with technology, right? In a way that, millennials kind of bridge that gap, but now you're into a generation in the workforce coming into the workforce that some of this is second nature. I think that that has probably helped accelerate adoption and certainly can be resources within your team that you look to be that early adopter, that leader in training, development, just overall excitement of what this can do for your practice and also for the patient base, right? I think this is a big point there in terms of the opportunity out there. That patient base is shifting too, right? It's there's this proliferation of technology across every aspect of our lives. Matt, you talked about it. You almost don't want to go to a healthcare provider unless you can text for your appointment or schedule online or this and that. Patients are looking to be met in different ways than they were a decade ago. I guess just interested in your thoughts of some of what's out there. How do you think about how those interests or demands from the patient perspective are shifting and ultimately what dentistry is doing to meet them?
Yeah, I think the expectations, right, are shifting as that generational changeover happens. I think the reality is, real or perceived, people think they're much busier today than ever before. Whether that's the higher velocity of everything that happens brought on by technology, whether that's kind of just the perspective of every generation as they get into the primary responsibilities of running the world. I think it's a reality either way because it's the perception. And so, like I said earlier, certainly my expectation when I'm interacting with a healthcare provider is I need it to be convenient and I need it to be easy, right? Because there's too much other stuff going on. I don't have time to go to a pediatrician and pick up a paper prescription, because one of my kids is sick. I need you to be able to e-prescribe, right? And so I think that's just very much the expectation. And practices that don't stay with that are at risk. You can think about that relationship aspect, right? Of we use this trust battery concept internally, which I think is a great concept. I think you can apply it here too. There's a certain amount of strength in the relationship, my relationship as a patient with any healthcare provider, right? Every time I go into that office, I see the healthcare provider and I'm impressed, I'm wowed, I feel cared for. That charges that battery up and that strengthens that relationship. Every time they send me a bill that I wasn't expecting and I don't understand how to read it and I'm irritated that I've got to call between 9 and 5 to ask a question, that's draining the battery, right? Every time I got to go pick up a prescription because they won't move to e-prescribe, that's draining that battery. So it's not that I think patients, are going to leave a practice that they otherwise love because they can't, have a text conversation with you, as an example. But it's one more thing, right? Where maybe if they're just somebody who's not that connected to the practice to begin with, maybe that is the breaking point for them. Maybe they moved years ago and they've been continuing to drive to the practice, but that drive is really, taking a charge out of that battery. And it's one more thing. So, when we're thinking about this, internally, we think about those kind of points of strength of the relationship and what are the things we're doing that are charging that battery and what are the things that we're doing that are discharging that and how do we minimize those and maximize the ones that are charging it?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that's very true. The other way I kind of think about that is, you have these opportunities when you are interacting with a patient, right? Or this could almost be a broader like customer service thing in general, right? Which is that, people are busy, they're stressed, they're doing all this thing. And, every time you touch the life of a patient or whomever, you have this opportunity to make them say, like, wow, that was like, was that it? Was it that easy? Was it that good? And I think it's underrated how like kind of just doing things really well can affect people.
Straight execution. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it seems like a silly thing to say, but yeah, like if you have a sick kid or whatever, and you call the pediatrician and they just say, hey, okay, it's gonna be ready in 15 minutes over there, and you're just kind of like, wow, okay, like I just need my problem solved, right? I don't necessarily need, I think there is also a tendency sometimes that is a balancing act of saying like, well, people want their problems solved, right? And if that problem is, I need to book a dental appointment, or I have a toothache, and I just need to get in. I need to speak to somebody. There's a balance, I think, in the kind of modern era between, there's like a high touch service, which wants to create kind of a concierge experience or whatever and make everyone really impressed. And there's maybe a place for that, if, you call them up, oh, Mr. Hanson, we're so happy to talk to you. What's wrong? How can I help you today? Okay, that's also fun. But what's also great is if I can just text and just get it done because I'm busy and I just want what I want as quickly and conveniently as possible. And if you can deliver that to me, I'm probably more likely to be super impressed than something that is maybe more formally or traditionally considered a high value, high touch experience.
Yeah. It's about the value of ease and convenience in today's world, right? The value to me as a consumer, right, of ease and convenience is very, very high. And, the value of me feeling pampered is high, but maybe not as high in relative terms as it used to be, right? Relative to just making it snappy, right? Easy.
Yeah. Yeah, no one wants to feel like a commodity being processed through a machine,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
they also don't want their time wasted, especially when
Yeah.
you're dealing with patient communication or things like that are happening outside the dental clinic. Chances are, that's the time they're pressed for time and just kind of want to get this good to go.
I feel like this is going down the road to a conversation about the proper length of a new patient appointment, but we'll save that for another episode.
That's a whole other podcast, probably. Yeah.
What's interesting, what you both just said, and I think this has been the common, maybe misconception, but certainly common belief that this integration of technology in dentistry, at least from patient interaction, is reducing that relationship, that bond, that touch that the patient has with the practice. What I'm hearing both of you say is that we don't actually share that view. We think that for the right patient, for a changing, generational shift, that it may actually increase that bond you have with the practice. Is that right?
I think that's exactly right. I think it's all about approach, like so many things in life and in leadership, especially, right? If you adopt technologies with the pure goal of reducing costs and increasing throughput, right, I think you can end up in a world where you have a very mechanical, very low relationship practice. I think if you approach bringing technology into the picture from the perspective of how can I improve the patient experience and how can I streamline my staff's duties so that they can invest more in that patient experience, then you can kind of get the best of both worlds, right? Where you are getting more throughput, but you're getting more throughput because you've got so much more time in your schedule and you're investing that time into those relationships. Sorry to steal probably a lot of your words there, David, but
no, I mean, I think there's a gap that's worth identifying there between the experience that you're having when you're outside as a patient when you're outside of the clinic and you're just trying to communicate with them, which is very different from what's going to happen once you're actually kind of within the four walls of the practice, and then you're in a mode of like, oh, I actually do want to have this kind of human connection with the person who's going to be treating me, and that's really important. But maybe when I'm on my cell phone, that's a poor place to look for human connection in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. I would say it's probably a place where you have to be smart about how you approach that, right? Because it can't come off as of you're not talking to the same practice that you were just in, right? It has to come off as authentic. It has to come off as being accessible is maybe the right word, where there's not a wall there, which I think sometimes can happen when you use a very mechanistic approach to how you communicate with patients outside the office. But you also have to couple that with understanding that, most patients don't want to have a 15 message back and forth in poorly formatted text messages in order to book an appointment, right? So it's got to be a structured, personalized but structured approach is kind of my view.
I want to hit a topic that maybe not as relevant to an individual practice owner, but I think it gives some insight into our approach to technology over the last now 11 plus years. Less than a year into building this organization, we had 3 or 4 practices, and Matt came to me and said, look, I want to start building some of our own tools. As a non-technology guy, all I knew about building software was it always goes way over budget and takes way more time. And at the time, I believe, Matt, I said, look, I don't want this to be something that ends up being $1 million and 5 years. And you went, nah, definitely not going to be that. 10 years later, we've invested multiple times that, but we've also made a real commitment to building a lot of our own technology for very specific reasons. I'd just be interested in hearing you guys articulate how you think about build versus buy, and kind of prioritizing that internally, really with the objective to give the most streamlined experience to our team.
Yeah, David, I'll let you take it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. That is one of the things that, being an organization as we've grown and operate at the scale we are, we have a lot of advantages to be able to make the dynamic of those build versus buy conversations becomes very different, right? When you're managing 50 plus practices versus 3, right? And so, we have the advantage there that, because part of the reason that dynamic changes, right, is when you're talking about buying a software solution, you say, oh, well, that's only $100 a month, per doctor, right? And then you multiply that, you keep those numbers add up really quickly. And so then the economies of scale that creates, the flip side of that is it creates an opportunity where it becomes marginally less expensive to kind of develop it yourself. And then you get those advantages of saying, well, it integrates very well with everything else we're doing, because everything else we're doing is, kind of centralized. It's in one piece of software. It can help, reinforce the best practices that we want to be reinforcing in our clinics. That's certainly a huge part of that original, that drive of trying to do that, is it, the tools help shape the work, right? And when we, just as our organization say, well, we think we have a template that's going to work for the clinic, or for any clinic that affiliates with us, when we provide the tools and those tools help nudge them in the direction of that template or guide them through that template, that's incredibly powerful, not just as a technology tool, but as part of kind of driving the vision of the DSO, right? So, when we certainly want to look at other things, we do have vendors. We still, pay outside vendors for some software, but we always have to be thinking about that. Like, is this? Could we do this in a way that really helps us, shape the behavior that we want, shape the experience that we want to provide? And a lot of times it winds up that, if we find something we really like, at some point it does make sense to kind of take that on ourselves and put our own imprint on it and push it forward that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are great points, and exactly the reasons why we the things we have to evaluate in each of these areas. The topic of integration is a huge one. That was a big pain point early on. You've got 6 different tools open, all the time, and you're going back and forth. And the training aspect of trying to train new team members as you grow as an organization, when you've got so many different tools, I think that's huge. I think the aspect that is really important that you mentioned as well is, having tools that reinforce behaviors, rather than the tools driving how you approach things. You fit the tools to fit your approach, right? And that reinforces the behaviors you're looking for, the workflows you're looking for. I would say from a bigger picture perspective as an organization, the big thing is, we are an organization built on partnership. So we're about enabling doctors to live their best life, be their best selves, right? And a big part of that is being the leader of your individual office. We believe that doctor leadership is the right way for dental practice to be run. We think there's a lot of challenges when you don't approach it from that starting point. And one of the great things about how kind of our technology is evolving is it's really become kind of a backbone that enables us to empower decentralized leadership. So, every one of our offices, sets their own plans for the year, and they have those plans loaded into the system, and they're able to track against them and see where they're at and how they're developing towards those goals. It allows us to have the kind of visibility and structure and oversight that it really does enable that decentralized leadership model. If you don't have any of that infrastructure, if you're running separate systems in every office, or you're running one system that's not structured for that, it really limits your ability as an organization to kind of push that decision making out from the core right to the edge. Is kind of the way we talk about it, where we want decisions made as close as possible to the patient experience. But the kind of paradoxical aspect of that is that in order to do that, you have to have better structure. You have to have a better system that's aligned with that goal. Because if you try to do that without that, it's just total chaos, right? And then it falls on its face. If you do it in a way that has, an operating system at its core, and then that operating system is integrated and aligned with tools you're actually using, then you have something that can operate at scale with a partnership approach and push that decision making, out to the place where it actually makes a difference in the patient experience.
All right, David, we're going to leave you with the final words here. The big question: if you could give one piece of advice to a doctor choosing technology, what would it be?
I would say just really focus on, not on what's shiny, what has the best sales pitch. Focus on what is the practical application of it, and can you picture when it's Monday morning and it's chaos in the front office, that your staff is going to be reaching for that tool and using it as a way to make their life better? Or is it something that's going to get jettisoned as soon as the rubber meets the road and things are chaotic? And if you can think about it that way, and you can look at that and say, hey, that's going to take that chaotic Monday morning and it's going to turn it into a better situation, you might be onto something. If you think the opposite, then think twice.
Great advice, and appreciate you joining us, David. We'll let you go, and we'll be back with the next episode next week.
All right, thank you guys. I've enjoyed
Thanks
it.
for joining us.